Hello guys, E899 here and welcome to today's video, and today we're going to be going through our tips and predictions for round 21 of the NRL season. Last week we ended up with 6 from 8 in a very close competitive games. Unfortunately, the ones I picked wrong. I picked Melbourne to beat Manly, which did almost happen, and I also tipped the Roosters to beat the Sharks, and that didn't happen either. So still a pretty decent round, but we're going to look to improve. Still looking for the 8 from 8. Hopefully it's this round. Without further ado, let's get into it. Starting off with the match tomorrow, and we have two of the teams that I tipped who ended up losing. It is the Melbourne Storm travelling away to take on the Sydney Roosters. Now, Roosters obviously coming off a bit of a cagey performance against the Sharks, while the Storm kind of really didn't play that well against Manly and essentially just let Manly go in and win, and I think it's more so that the Storm lost that match. The Storm currently sit in 3rd place with a win getting them up into 2nd up until the match on Sunday where the Bulldogs play against Manly. However, a win for the Roosters could see them climb into the top 8, barring certain results, plus the Dolphins having a bye, so pretty much they'll end up 9th. Roosters being at home, this is going to be very crucial for them to get the job done. I think the Storm could become a little bit complacent, and I'm going to trust my gut for some reason. Going with the upset, I'm saying the Roosters will do it in a close one. Now we move into the Friday game, and we start off with at 6 PM. We have the North Queensland Cowboys up against the St George Illawarra Dragons. It will like to call the Battle of Mid. The Cowboys are coming off a pretty dismantling by the Dolphins, whilst the Dragons are coming off a very close loss to the Bulldogs. But a little bit controversial, but it's hard to say. Now, obviously, both teams desperately needing the wins if they want any sort of run into the finals. The Cowboys currently with that 1-point draw, keeping them away. They're in 13th. A win would put them on to 19 points, which would see them jump up to 11th. Including over the Dragons, but a win for the Dragons would put them on 20 points, which would still keep them at 11th, but it would start trying to separate themselves from the bottom and more looking towards the top. I think this is going to be a match where essentially whoever loses, their season's going to be done, but I'm going to say that I think the Cowboys are going to keep their season alive just about. They'll go into 11th, and I think they're going to get the job done over the Dragons. Now we go into the final game on the Friday, and we have the Brisbane Broncos taking on the Parramatta Eels. Now, the Broncos are coming off the bye. They're pretty fresh off. However, the Parramatta Eels are coming off a bit of a dismantling by the Canberra Raiders in a 40-16 loss. A win for the Broncos can have them situate a 3-point gap away from other teams sitting in 5th, because it's a little bit too much of a gap for them to make it close to the top 4. However, a win for Parramatta would launch them up into 18 points, which would essentially at the minimum take them out of the bottom 4. However, as much as I want to say that Parramatta can cause the upset, I just personally do not see it happening, and I think the Broncos are going to get the job done. Now we move on to the Saturday games, and at 3 PM we have the New Zealand Warriors against the Gold Coast Titans. The New Zealand Warriors are coming off some planet-aligning bullshit. It's the only way I can describe it as. Genuinely, I'm pretty certain Tanner Boyd sold his soul for that, because if he was going back to New Zealand and they didn't score that try, he would have been murdered. And I'm probably not kidding. However, whilst the Titans are coming off a very closely combated game against the West Tigers at Leichhardt, the Tigers just about doing enough to get over the line. I do think it was kind of unfortunate for the Titans to not get over the line in that game against West. It was just very unfortunate circumstances for them. It was a good match, but yeah, to be completely honest, against the Warriors in New Zealand, where a win for the Warriors could see them jump up as high as 3rd. I mean, they could technically jump up past 2nd, depending on results with the Storm and the Bulldogs, but they need a massive win here, which could happen, but I just think the Warriors should be able to win this pretty handily. Now we go into the 5:30 kickoff on Saturday, and we have the Penrith Panthers taking on the West Tigers. The Penrith Panthers are coming off a 20-point win over a depleted South Sydney, whilst their opponents, the West Tigers, are coming off the aforementioned 1-point win over the Gold Coast. A win for Penrith would actually make them leapfrog the Broncos, depending on that result of that game, up into 5th, whilst a win for the West Tigers could get them up to 20 points, so they could be over the Dragons and the Cowboys, obviously depending on whatever happens in that game. And I just think it's quite interesting to see what does happen in this game, but I think Penrith are all back to normal. They are playing against Taylor May, who's in his second game back following being sacked from Penrith, and it is now against his former club. So it should be cool to see what does happen there, but I don't see the Tigers winning this. I want them to. I just am going to be safe and pick the Panthers. And now we go to the Saturday, 7:35. And now we go to the 7:35 kickoff on the Saturday. We have the South Sydney Rabbitohs taking on the Cronulla Sharks at Polytech Stadium in Gosford. I did not realise they changed the stadium name again. The South Sydney Rabbitohs, as previously mentioned, coming off that 20-point loss to Penrith, but they have a massively depleted team, and they kind of still do. Jai Gray's back, so that means Alex Johnson can play on the wing, so he can try to keep going and get his Ken Irvine medal. I did see he extended to 2027, which is good, so pretty much right at the window before Papua New Guinea come into the NRL. And the Sharks are coming off their win over the Roosters, much needed, as they currently sit just barely in the top 8 because it's starting to get very, very close there. A win for the Rabbitohs would see themselves jump out of the bottom 4, whilst a win for the Sharks could see them as high as possibly 6th place, depending on other results. But obviously the Sharks desperately needing a win to keep themselves within the safety of the top 8. And you just got to pick them here. Like, if Souths win, I would consider it probably the biggest upset this season. Now we go into the Sunday games, where at 2 p.m. we have the Canberra Raiders taking on the Newcastle Knights. Now the Raiders coming off a very solid win over the Parramatta Eels. I mean, it is Parramatta who have been struggling, but, you know, Canberra's still going very hot and strong. The Newcastle Knights, I think, played very valiantly, losing in the last minute against the Warriors when, obviously, the injuries, plus nearly all the players shitting themselves for real. Like, they all had gastro, generally 5 players for the captain's run, and they put in that effort against a top 4 team. I think it's pretty darn acceptable. Now, a win for the Knights would get them out of the bottom 4 up onto 18 points, whilst a win for the Raiders would be obviously to keep backing up their points differentials with the Bulldogs. Obviously, they've still got a bye in hand, so very high chancehood to keep going one step closer to winning the minor premiership. And I think the Knights will be up for the game, but I just think the Raiders are unfortunately going to be too good for them. So I think the Raiders will get the win. Now, finally, we go to the 4:05 p.m. game to close out the round. It is the Bulldogs up against the Manly Sea Eagles. Now, the Bulldogs coming off a very close win against the Dragons, scraping teeth style victory. And they're taking on Manly, who had come off another scrape teeth victory, this time over the Melbourne Storm in Melbourne. This obviously is a rematch of their elimination final clash from last year. Manly did win in very close fashion, and I expect this game to be very close as well. A win for the Sea Eagles would jump them up to 26 points, which could have them within the top 6. However, the Bulldogs need the win to keep close barring with the Raiders. So I think that in a very close game, I think the Bulldogs will get some form of revenge and they'll get the win. And that's going to be the end of the tips video. Who do you guys have this week? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you all later.